pursuant to Standing Order 1083H and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, the committee resumed its study of foreign interference and threats to the integrity of democratic institutions, intellectual property, and the Canadian state.
Canadien. J'aimerais maintenant...
I would now like to welcome our witness today from the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, Mr. Alexandre Trudeau, member. Mr. Trudeau, the floor is yours for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been a volunteer for the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation for 22 years. I started in the days following the death of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. There were a lot of proposals suggesting resources on behalf of Mr. Trudeau, but I believe that we shouldn't remember him for the cause of his death, but rather for what he's done for intellectual life. If there were to be a monument for him, it needed to include an intellectual work that was ceaseless and vibrant. I joined a group of senior officials in order to work on the programs of the Foundation. These programs were responding to an urgent need to support research in social sciences and humanities in Canada.
As a volunteer, I served as a corporate director and a member of the executive committee of the Foundation until September 2020. I also participated in the different committees that selected the 4 presidents of the Foundation. For more than 2 decades, I have given everything I possibly could to the Foundation and its important mission. One of the greatest privileges of my life has been to serve alongside the many extraordinary Canadians who volunteered in the governance structures of the Foundation. Though these volunteers came from very different walks of life and extremely varied ideological backgrounds, everyone shared the belief that rigorous intellectual activity and excellence in academic research are of capital importance for the prosperity and even independence of our country. Since its creation, the Foundation has granted several hundred scholarships to our most brilliant researchers and has given them the tools and training to make their important work more accessible to Canadians at large. The scholars, fellows, and mentors that I have had the privilege of getting to know personally have all made me very proud to be Canadian.
Thanks to them, I can assert that Canada, in a world that's losing pieces of itself every day, is nevertheless remaining a proud bastion of reason.
Bastion of reason and tolerance, as perhaps the last refuge even for a universal humanism, that Canada has become the target of foreign interference.
Foreign interference is a significant problem which seeks to disturb the operations of our institutions and our democracy. Many foreign powers are motivated to influence the Canadian state in malicious ways.
Insist that there was no foreign interference, no possibility of interference, no intention or means of interference at or through the Trudeau Foundation.
No state and no individual attempted to influence the Canadian government through the Foundation.
So why are we here today?
It's not a matter of interference, but rather a management crisis fueled by significant mistakes made by our former president. At this committee last week, and through her behavior in the previous months, she raised questions that would lead some to believe that there were attempts at interference. But let's examine what she said.
To influence the Justin Trudeau government by a donation to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. 2, that there is a mystery around the identity of the donors or their affiliation. 3, that there was something illegitimate about my signing of the donation contract. 4, that there were irregularities around the issuance of the charitable receipt. 5,
that inappropriate instructions or unusual instructions from the donor to the Foundation were made. 6, that there was a refusal by certain board members to recuse themselves from an investigation on the donation. 7, that a legal opinion from lawyers of the Foundation was made that certain board members were in a situation of conflict of interest and that governance changes needed to happen. 8, that the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation attempted to influence the government of Justin Trudeau, or that it had a link with the Justin Trudeau government? The answer to all those questions is a resounding no.
My hope is that we can now take up these questions one by one to carefully shed light on how the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation has not been a part of any foreign interference attempts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau, for your statement. Below time, I appreciate that. I know that the committee does. Before we begin, I will say, for the benefit of the committee, yesterday we had some sidebar discussions that were happening. They were impacting the interpreters. So if there are any sidebar discussions to be had today, please take them to the extreme back of the room, not near the interpreters. Okay, that's all I ask for today. We are going to start.
Chair?
Yes, go
Sorry
ahead.
to interrupt. I just have a quick point of order. We don't have a screen right here in front of us
Okay.
on this side, and it's a bit harder to see. I don't know if we can fix that.
Madam Clerk, if you could look after that, I appreciate that, Ms. Hepner. Before we begin, we'll make sure that we get that corrected. No, it doesn't impact the audio, but is it there now? Okay, wonderful. So we're going to begin our first round of questioning, 6-minute rounds for each party, and we are going to start with Mr. Barrett. Go ahead, sir, for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for coming here today, Mr. Trudeau. You asked why we're here today, and you listed some reasons why. We're here today because the Globe and Mail reported that CSIS had uncovered an influence operation targeting Prime Minister Trudeau through donations to the Trudeau Foundation. And you listed a number of questions, and so I hope I can help afford you the opportunity to answer some of those, but I have limited time and would appreciate your help in keeping your answers concise. How many donations did you sign donation agreements for at the Trudeau Foundation? How many times have you done
Apart
that?
from the times I've donated myself, only the single time that was mentioned.
Only one. So in 18 years, just the one time.
Correct. 20 years, yeah.
That's exceptional, you'd say.
The circumstances were such that I needed to sign.
Okay. So they were such that you needed to sign, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Were you involved in the negotiations for other donations?
Let me think. Not really. A little bit for the John McBain donation.
Okay.
But not in any formal way. Negotiations for donations are usually, sometimes they're started by governance members, but usually they're taken on by the leader, the president of the foundation.
Okay. So we know that Beijing had consular officials that were part of the deal from the beginning, to the extent where they were in meetings with the foundation to arrange this funding.
My understanding that was, I wasn't at any meeting. Maybe there was on the signing ceremony. One of the issues that you have to understand is that the donors, so Mr. Zhang Bin and Mr. Niu Gensheng, don't speak a word of English.
Okay.
So at a lot of times where you're thinking that they are using consular officials as basically free translation services, free and appropriate translation, as opposed to getting someone who's not trained in the kind of diplomatic translation. These men took their donations seriously.
So is it more than just the signing ceremony? Because we have access to information documents that demonstrate that there were consular officials in the meeting with Mr. Rosenberg and several other people, including the executive director, Ms. Comtois, and that the action out from that meeting was that your approval, Mr. Trudeau, was required, and
You understand why?
I understand why.
I was giving the approval for the Université de Montréal to use the name of my father, so acting as a family member, to say that the Université de Montréal could be using the name of Pierre Trudeau to launch a scholarship program.
The desire for Beijing to get access and influence with the leader of a G7 country is it's well documented. We know that foreign influence operations are perpetrated on many, if not every, country. But in this case, we saw that the donation by way of these cutouts, people acting on behalf, as the wiretap information demonstrated that they were going to be refunded by.
Have you heard the wiretap evidence?
By the CCP. And it was reported in the Globe and Mail, sir.
And reports on
Chair?
single sources. Sorry.
Chair, just on a point of order, if I can.
Okay. My apologies. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I haven't interrupted Mr. Trudeau, and I would just ask for the
Yeah,
same
Mr.
courtesy.
Trudeau,
I understand.
Mr. Barrett is asking questions
understand.
at a time that he requires the response. Please respond appropriately. Go ahead, Mr. Barrett. I did stop your time. You have 2 minutes left.
The desire for them to run an influence operation was evidenced in that reporting in the Globe and Mail. And within 5 months of this donation being signed, both the gentlemen were given direct access to the Prime Minister. That's quite a deal for $140,000, I'd say, that they were both able to access the Prime Minister. And the situation around it, where we have consular officials from the People's Republic of China directing how the donation is to flow, we have the involvement for the first and only time in 18 years on the foundation of the Prime Minister's brother. We have the Prime Minister's brother, you, sir, signing that donation agreement, and it culminating with those cash for access events with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister. That raises incredibly concerning questions for Canadians. You said you had to sign at the start of my questions. You said that you had to sign. Why did you have to sign?
Because it was a three-way agreement between the foundation, four in many ways, the foundation, myself representing the Trudeau family, l'Université de Montréal, and the donors. So I guess I could have, the main reason I signed is because Morris asked me to. I also had signing authority at the time, so I was regularly signing checks at the foundation. So, but I imagine I could have given a procuration to Morris to sign for the family, but it was his suggestion that for the views of the ceremony and honoring these men who I, by the way, still have no reason to believe their motives were not honorable.
Is that time? Okay.
And so that's why I signed. It was in that capacity as a family member, giving the permission to use the name.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Barrett, next up for 6 minutes. Ms. Hepner, go ahead, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here with us today and answering these questions. You publicly expressed a desire to appear before this committee to give your input on the issues of foreign interference and the foundation. You said it was urgent, in fact, that you do so. And I find it somewhat unusual. We don't typically have people clamoring to come testify before this committee. So please explain to us why you thought it was necessary to be here today.
Because I felt that the reputation and most importantly the work of the scholars, this foundation is really not about its governance structure or about the politics around it or about interpretations that we make. There's a lot of very fine people doing very serious work, and they were asking questions. And I had hoped that the Auditor General perhaps would look at us with their impartiality and all the rest, as others, as the chair of our board had requested. And I felt that this was a forum at which the truth could be addressed and made clear and doubt cleared up. And so I thought it was important. I knew I would get the attention perhaps necessary to make the important corrections to the record. There was a lot of misinformation going on. There has been from the start. I would argue even the Globe and Mail article, I find journalism on the basis of one single anonymous source, poor journalism. The facts of that report were problematic, since it never at any point was it questioned that those donors give $1 million to the Trudeau Foundation. So why is someone claiming that they were going to be reimbursed? You know, these men have, in their standing in China, New Gensheng, for instance, is well admired for his philanthropic. There's not a lot of huge philanthropists to the level of Niu Genshen. They're admired in China. So there were a lot of things that I felt needed to be corrected for the good work of the foundation to continue and for all the doubts that are being thrown around about it to stop.
Because at the end of the day, like you say, this is an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan charity that gives scholarships to young people, provides mentorships, helps them give back to their communities. And I understand this must be very personal to you. In fact, this is a foundation created in your father's name. It serves as, honoring his legacy. So maybe you could speak a little bit about the work that you've done with the foundation over the past 20 odd years.
Thank you. As I described, I've been a volunteer amongst many, and I'm by no means, more prominent than others, but I've served on most of the committees, perhaps not the finance committee. I've been a part of the foundation from its earliest days. It is really not about us or what is being said. It is really about the work. It's research, and it's not just research. It's research helping researchers find new ways to get their work out, help them to understand realms that are outside of the university. So we've heard a lot about meetings with civil servants. That was something that the foundation is very proud of. It's one of the reasons why we were so excited of bringing a man of the stature of Morris Rosenberg in, precisely because he offered a window for brilliant Canadian researchers into the functioning of our government, not in a partisan way, not in a partial way, not about any kind of influence, but so our smartest minds understand how our government works and how they deal with ideas within the civil service.
You mentioned a couple of points you felt were inaccurate in media reports about the 2016 donation. Is there anything else that you would like to correct for the record?
Oh, there's a lot. I was going to work through the points.
You got 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, as I say, these donors, before they came, when they first approached me, it was the University of Montreal that approached me, they want a donation to them to commemorate Pierre Trudeau as a student there and a teacher, frankly. And these donors had given to the University of Toronto for a medical grant of $800,000, or this donor, frankly, it was Zhang Bin at that point, to commemorate Bethune. So if someone who knows China, especially who's traveled through China and dealt with elderly Chinese, there are two things they'll tell you. Canada, good. Canada, hada. And they'll say, Bechuan, Tourdo. They'll say these were people who were friends of China. And we're not talking the Chinese government, we're talking the people. So there was no surprise to me. It was an honor to have someone say they wanted to create scholarships for Pierre Trudeau. So again, the pretenses of that they had first started with Université de Montréal, that they were going there and that they were going to use the Université de Montréal to somehow influence a non-existent Trudeau government that would come. This was my first meeting our first contact was in December of 2013 when a secretary from the law department wrote me about this. It was a long way from any notion of a Trudeau government, even a Trudeau opposition leader. So again, the idea that there was a setup here, I just think is patently false.
And just quickly, we have 30 seconds left. Just to clarify, there was no relationship between your brother's government and the Trudeau Foundation.
Never has been.
Never has been.
We are. It's an academic institution that does scholarship work. Of course, there is the relation to the Ministry of Innovation, now that it's called Industry, as I remembered when we started, which is a reporting duty, which we do, and all those are available and all the rest. But that's a civil service relationship monitoring the contract that was granted the foundation at its creation to administer these scholarships, fellowships, and mentorships. So that's the relationship. There is no political relationship, and there never has been.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Ms. Hepner, Monsieur Villemure, vous êtes...
Monsieur Villemure, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. I have a few questions. They'll be brief because my time is limited. Before going to the heart of things, were you asked to come here today? No. Were you prepared? Did the Prime Minister's office prepare you for this? No. You left the foundation in 2020. No, I did not. I'm still a member of the foundation. I'm no longer part of the executive committee or the board. And why did you leave? Well, I just wanted to take a break. It had been 20 years. I'm very active, or I was very active, and I just wanted to take a break. Very well. You mentioned in point 7 or 8 the circumstances that Ms. Fournier raised with us with regards to certain board members leaving. Were you there at that time? No. And where did you get this information from? From the witnesses directly, and recently I was given a brief of what had happened. So what Ms. Fournier said is false? Yes. Why did she leave? Because of a management crisis. I'm just going to go back to my notes. Well, at first, it was in reaction to what was shared in the Globe and Mail, and the board president wanted to have an independent investigation, and Ms. Fournier wanted to be at the head of this, which was against what legal counsel was recommending, that they were saying that it should be independent. She also accused certain board members by quoting counsel of the foundation and saying that they were in a conflict of interest and that they should recuse themselves or that the governance structure should change. And again, I wasn't there for that, but they did tell me this. When the board asked the legal opinion, well, they said something else. So there was an issue in trust. And she raised things that were not true. So you have two completely different versions of facts. I think that the board president will be able to give you more information. Yes, she mentioned that she wanted to have an independent investigation, and she, according to her, stated that board members that were there should recuse themselves. And there was never a refusal to recuse themselves. They were trying to create an independent committee of administrators that were not there when those events occurred. And even in the days leading up to her stepping down, the board had a consensus to create an independent committee, and then she stepped down. And then trust evaporated once she lied to the board with regards to the legal advice. She wanted to put in place a new board president according to non-written principles. What you've said is the opposite of what she said. Do you believe that she was well treated after leaving? Up until the last minute, there was no expectation that she would leave. The board thought that they had a consensus, that they had a way forward, and it was Easter Friday and Easter Monday without there being communication between board members. Well, people started stepping down. With 8 other people, yes. Well, there are only 3 actually that stayed. And she mentioned that the IT department went to her house to take her devices, and that seemed to be similar to a seizure. What do you think of that? That's the first time I'm hearing about it, but because there was some bad faith here, there must have been concerns about misinformation, and so I believe that the foundation made the decision to take back their devices. Earlier with the donations, you mentioned why you had to sign, but according to Ms. Fournier, you didn't have the power to sign. Maybe for the name, but well, again, when the president asks me to sign, and it was a four-person contract, so nobody else could have signed. The president asked me. I was signing things all the time. I didn't see the issue. So you did have a signatory power. Yes, for paychecks, for example, because it took 2 signatures. So yes, I did sign. So now when you receive a donation out of left field, regardless of where it comes from, were there circumstances that led these 2 men to meet with you? Again, the donation was not offered to us. It was offered to, or it was organized with the Université de Montréal and their Faculty of Law. I told them that Mr. Gaudreau Desbiens came to see me, and I told him that since the foundation was created, all fundraising activities on behalf of Pierre Trudeau should go through the Trudeau Foundation. So we thought we had a monopoly, but they were saying that we had such a great opportunity here, and so at that time in 2013, or 2014 rather, I met them in January 2014. Apologies, Mr. Trudeau, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Villemur.
I'll go to you next for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, and welcome to the committee. I'll say that in a previous meeting, I attempted to maybe not have you involved here, but you volunteered to come before the committee. You're here before us today, and hopefully you're able to shed some light. You had in your opening remarks a list of 7 points.
8.
8 points. And at the appropriate time, would you be willing to submit those points to this committee? Am I correct that you probably watched the other?
I did, yeah.
The other testimony, and so there was a lot of statements made.
Yes.
Right, and now's your opportunity to kind of rebut some of those. And so on the issue of recusal, I think that's your point 6.
7, yes.
If you could maybe just expand on the point of recusal and why you didn't think that was an issue.
I should note that the chair, for instance, was the corporate secretary of Power Corporation of Canada for, I think, some decades. This is a man, I would say, one of the premier experts in this country in corporate governance. This is a man to whom board conduct is second nature. That was his job at one of the most meticulous private companies in this country. So his sense of decorum, of respect, is incomparable. He's certainly a very, very dignified gentleman. So immediately, as the notion that there's these doubts were, we all wanted clarity. We all wanted clarity to get out immediately. There is nothing there. There is nothing there. Please investigate us. Anyone who would want. And so,
who were the other people that would have been named as a potential conflict of interest?
Well, Pascal claimed that the lawyers had told her that anyone active in the governance structures in the years of the donation, and which was false. No lawyers told her that. When they came to the board, they said, no, of course not. It's way too early for these kind of opinions. So the essence was setting up an independent committee, even before this even happened.
Of the board members.
Of board members, because in our bylaws, the board, external lawyers and experts all answer to the board, not management. It's part of, quite frankly, normal governance practices. So the chair immediately tried, as soon as there was this notion that there was a crisis of information going on, and saying, for those, had to set up an independent inquiry, wanted 3 board members who were not present at the time.
Right.
This was his instinct, second nature, and he did that.
I'm gonna interject, because I also am quite surprised, given the nature of the people who are on that board, that you did end up in what appears to be a bit of a governance crisis, crisis management problem, given the high caliber people who were there, and quite frankly, given some of the conflicting testimonies that's been presented to this committee. Having served on a local community foundation board myself, I'm not sure how you guys got there, but that's not what is at issue here. What is at issue is the foreign interference stuff. But this idea and the allegations that were made, I think it's important that you have a chance to respond. In a Le Devoir article in regards to the climate within the foundation, you stated that there was a management crisis, which you attributed to errors of judgment and serious misconduct. In your opening remarks, you also stated that you were part of a committee that hires a president. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And so you would have been...
all 4.
You would have been involved in hiring Ms. Fortier.
Yes.
Right? Fournier, sorry. And she was also a former fellow. Is that correct?
Former scholar, first round.
How long of a relationship would you have had?
I've known her for 20 years.
What went wrong?
I could speculate on it. I guess the climate at the foundation had grown more difficult in the fact, she has some very good skill sets, and she managed, from the point of view of the board, she managed our programming quite well. And it's a complicated, but the staff environment of the board was realizing that there was more and more, and such as me, I'm a member, so I have some custodial, but I'm not directly. I was hearing about it, that there was an enormous amount of turnover in the staff.
There was also allegations that there was a hostile climate at the board level, intimidation, bullying, conflicts, internal.
At the board? No, never. There was a very tense few weeks at the end where there was a fight over management trying to set up an investigation itself and making false representations to the board.
And are you aware that she has offered to provide some documents that may offer conflicting accounts to what you're presenting here today?
I'm all for all the documents that come forward. I think the documents, if the chair of the board comes forward, I would like to submit the resume from the directors of
In her
what
testimony,
happened.
Ms. Fournier stated that she did not use any money associated with the donation because it had nothing to do with her mandate and wasn't a part of the previous mandate either. Given that you were involved in the conversations and negotiations with donors who established the conditions that the money must be used to organize lectures regarding China, why did you agree to these conditions for the donation despite the fact that they did not align with the mandate?
I signed the contract, but I did not negotiate the agreement.
Well, you were involved in the negotiations.
When I was contacted by Jean-François Gaudreau-Desbiens, we were in an interim period. Our president had left, and we were in a...
You were involved in the negotiations.
I was not involved in negotiations, no.
According to a Le Devoir article in 2019, the University of Montreal dean the faculty of law, France Houle, wrote the Trudeau Foundation, referring to a discussion that her predecessor, who you've referenced, Gaudreau-Desbiens, with Mr. Trudeau about the donation, stating that you, Alexandre Trudeau, mentioned to him that your foundation wanted to give the faculty of law of the University of Montreal the $200,000 donation. Do you recall that?
I met with Gaudreau-Desbiens. I even met with the donor in June 2nd. But at that time, my communications to them all the time were interim. In June, when I finally met with the rector of the university and the donor, I told them all the same thing, that we'd just chosen our new president, and it is his mandate to manage and negotiate donations.
In retrospect, you wish you had just given it to the university?
Mr. Green?
Well,
Sorry, sir. That's
It's okay.
well, I hate this part of the job, honestly, where I got to cut people off, but I do have to stick by the times, and we did go a little over. That concludes our first round of questioning. We should be able to get the entire second round in, and we're going to start with Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
So, Mr. Trudeau, you said that your involvement came in December of 2013. That's 8 months after your brother became leader of the Liberal Party.
Sorry, I missed your question. Sorry, what was it?
That I was recounting that you had said that you first became involved with this through the university in December of 2013.
Correct, yeah.
Right. It was right after 8 months after your brother became leader of the Liberal Party. Then in September of 2014, regime officials participate in a meeting with the foundation to negotiate this donation. Then in September of 2015, weeks before the federal election, there's a massive push, a rush, less than a day to complete the signing of this donation, but it didn't come to pass. So in May of 2016, 2 weeks before the donation contract is signed, Chinese Cultural Industry Association representatives meet with the Prime Minister in the residence of Benson Wong, who's the chairman of the board of directors of the Chinese Chamber of Commerce of Canada. Then the donation is finalized in June, and in July of that year, the CCIA confirms that the payment of the first installment of $70,000 is made. And then in October, Justin Trudeau meets with Mr. Gengsheng. So this process has gone on for years, but there seems to only be any urgency for it around political events. involving the now Prime Minister of a G7 country, and there's direct involvement by officials from the dictatorship in China. When did you first meet Bin Zhang?
I met him in June 2nd, 2014. And you realize the money was never spent, eh? There was no... The donations came through in two, and then third part was basically refused, and we never launched the program or spent the money.
Thank you. When did you first meet Nu Gensheng?
I met him only at the signing ceremony at the Université de Montréal.
So that was in 2016.
That was, I believe so, yeah.
When you met with Mr. Zhang, what were the discussions? Did they include any? Was it specifically about the mandate of the foundation? Were political affairs discussed? Kind of
he wanted
culture in Canada.
When I met in June, I seem to remember he really wanted to do. He said he was really excited about. Again, the consular officials were translators. I don't remember if they were anyone there was very junior, but he was excited about what he'd done at U of T. He was excited about doing something similar at Université de Montréal. He kind of understand, and I think Monsieur Lefebvre reported at one point how he's a little bit irked that the Trudeau family was suddenly involved in the Trudeau Foundation. He wanted just to apply the same model he'd applied at U of T at Université de Montréal. And so he was friendly, but not overly so. And I told him what I was telling Mr. Green. We had to wait for the new president to come in to start negotiations.
Did this donation and its connection to the CCP ever raise any red flags for you?
The connection to the CCP. So this donation came from a private company in good standing in Canada. This is a company that whose bank account is in the Bank of Montreal, governed by very strict rules and money laundering and all the rest.
So no.
So the relations to the culture, Chinese cultural, I checked it as soon as I sort of knew that he was in what is this Chinese Cultural Industry Association, and it's. I wouldn't call it the British Council or the Goethe Institute, but these are governmental.
I have to take my time back. I've got 30 seconds left. The CCIA is established as being a soft power arm of the Communist Party of China. That's an established fact. When did you become aware that Canada's intelligence services were investigating this as an influence operation? And when you found out, who did you talk to about it?
I only read it like others in the Globe and Mail, and I questioned the veracity of it right away. I don't think this is accurate information.
How much time do I have? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Trudeau, next, the prochaine.
Ms. Martinez-Ferrada, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau, for being with us today. I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to some of the questions that you raised on your 8 points. I get the impression that you weren't able to clarify on all your answers. You talked about interference, but then you also explained the matter on the signature. So perhaps the question on the receipt, the irregularities of the receipt. So I wanted to give you some time. It is important because it was at the heart of our ex-president's testimony. We need to say that two donations, the first two parts, came from the same bank account from BMO for the company Millennium Golden Eagle Incorporated Canada. As I explained, there are quite significant laws on money laundering. So if a bank says that the account is well established, well, it means that it's a company that operates following Canada's norms. The receipt was issued, and because the donations came from the same account, well, the receipt was issued to the company's name. And we were talking about instructions, and I'll move to that first question for for those instructions, there are often individuals that ask their company to make a donation. That's what happened. Mr. Zhang Bin and his collaborator is his uncle, I found out. So they're both from the same family. So they have an established company with legitimate operations in Canada. They make a donation. The receipt was issued to that company, and those instructions, for example, if they came from the cultural association that Mr. Barrett mentioned, it's for translation reasons, in my opinion. He's a member of that association, and he probably used them to get things translated. And the instructions were to please send the receipt to the address in China, and I don't think there's anything there. It would have been great for the Auditor General to inspect all of this, but we're doing it here. So you would have wanted an independent investigation. Yes, of course. I'll ask you the same questions that I asked to the two previous witnesses. So the links between the foundation and the government, because before 2015, it was a different government in place. So the foundation has no partisanship, isn't partisan? No. And even when the foundation was created, there were 3 member categories. Family members, so there's 3. Ordinary members, there's 19 of those. And 6 members for the government. And the first government filled out those members. And at that time, that was Mr. Chrétien's government. But no other government after that appointed members or administrators. And so we had the same members, and now we only have 1 left of the 2 administrators. So the Trudeau government, the Harper government, they didn't appoint anyone. Did you speak to your brother about the donation? No, but before the policy, well, my brother said to me once, I trust you with the foundation. He had other things to do, so he wasn't really involved. Even before he became a leader of the Liberal Party, and since he became Prime Minister, we haven't talked about it. And do you believe that the situation that we're in now, and with interference and the current geopolitical situation, do you believe that that is why you're here today? That situation that was shared in 2016 in newspapers, why do you think that we're talking about it again? It's because of a crisis management issue. We wouldn't have been here if the president hadn't insisted on sharing disinformation to the board. The geopolitical situation has changed many times, and so I understand that this committee has the responsibility to investigate interference, Chinese interference, and that's why I'm here in good faith. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you, Ms. Martinez-Ferrada. We're moving on to Mr. Villemur, who has 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2.5 minutes, that's not very long. So, Mr. Trudeau, how do you explain that, according to Ms. Fournier, the annual reports for 2016-2017 had contradicting information on where the donations came from? I think that's false. I'd have to see the annual reports, but I think that's false. She was trying to interpret that the fact that the company's address, as if there was something unusual, that that company that was based in Dorval, also, it's a company from a Chinese citizen, but she was saying that as if it was a problem, but we could have examined all of that through an independent investigation. But she was using that information in order to cause tensions, and that's why we're here today. I understand that an independent investigation is quite common for boards, and you wanted to prove that you were absolutely squeaky clean, and that was refused by the 3 remaining members? No, not at all. I would like to share what the members said happened, according to all the dates, and that would reflect the minutes of what happened at those board meetings. Yes, I will share that. The board president wanted to have an independent committee that would give the mandate to lawyers and accountants to do this investigation. We wanted the truth to be shown, knowing that there was nothing there. So your allegation, or her allegation, what you're saying, complete contradiction. We saw that donations were about 25,000, and 200,000 is significant, 140,000. Well, at that time, the board president, John McCall McBain, had offered $3 million in donations. So in 2013, it was still interesting for the foundation, and it is for other countries, but for China, as soon as my brother became a prime minister, doing academic diplomacy would become problematic for the foundation, and you would understand why. But in 2013, academic diplomacy with China was very interesting. To have Chinese researchers come and participate in our events was interesting at the time. The Université de Montréal had good ties. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Villemur.
Minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Trudeau, you can appreciate the sensitivity. I'm sure you've grown up in a lifestyle that would have a lot of attention, to say the least. What precautions did the Trudeau Foundation take to ensure that there was an appropriate firewall between you and your brother and the political partisan work and the foundation's work?
Well, it was always raised, especially in the early days when he first was the paperwork to make sure that it was well documented, long before, frankly, he became prime minister.
Documented through policies?
Documented through a letter from him to the and then acknowledged by both the board, I believe, and the members, that it was on the record that though the bylaws are a little bit odd of the foundation, in the fact they've stipulated that the 3 family members are the executors of the testament.
Right.
This came from the civil servants who wrote the bylaws.
Sure.
So by force, Justin Trudeau is and was an executor of the last will and testament of Pierre Trudeau, so
Right.
we had to be corrected. Right after the fact, basically every meeting we said, these are new times now. And
Written policy and procedures?
I'm sorry?
Did you have written policies and procedures?
I'm not aware of any, but
We're going back to the question of governance. We're going back to the
Yeah.
subject matter experts around the table, high-powered lawyers, power corporation people, and yet no policies and procedures. Nothing in writing that you could submit to this committee that would create an assurance to us that there was a process in place should politically sensitive situations occur, there'd be a firewall between the now Prime Minister and the foundation.
The firewall was constantly affirmed and constantly reiterated to the public and to whoever that we are a non-partisan organization.
I'll give you the
with
opportunity.
No political links.
I'll give you the opportunity just to clarify and put on the record, and you don't have to name names, but is it safe to say you probably had appointees from many different political backgrounds and parties?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very fine individuals from many different parties.
On the question of the donation, do you believe that the donor on the tax receipt was the true donor on the $200,000?
The tax receipt was a company, and the true donors were these individuals. So as is normal practice, as I was explaining since the, I believe, Hamilton v. Bank of Montreal from the 1920s, of corporations empowered to make donations on behalf of individuals.
In our last committee meeting, an article from La Presse was referenced and stated that in 2016, a board member made a senior staff member aware that the real donor wasn't the same donor as the tax receipt. That's an allegation that was made. In her testimony, Pascal Fournier stated that the board member in question was Farah Mohammed. In 2016, were you made aware that the real donor was allegedly not the donor listed in the tax receipt?
That's absolutely false. That there was any. That's one of my points. That there was any confusion around these donors. It was always this company, with multiple addresses, which allowed our ex-president to make some confusion around it, and these two individuals. There was no confusion about that then, and there never has been.
Okay, that concludes the time, and the only reason why I allowed it to go a little bit further is because you mentioned Hamilton, Mr. Green. So
You mentioned what? Sorry?
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Yeah, that's the word of the day. La prochaine intervention, c'est pour.
Next, we have Mr. Berthold for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau, for being with us. Mr. Trudeau, you mentioned your concern for the Chinese Communist Party. When did they start trying to interfere with universities and democracies? You would know better than I, but all of the big powers are trying to interfere, but I believe that China might be 4th on the list of countries. But you know China, you studied it for years, and so you know that the regime is trying to interfere with Western democracies. It might not be a matter of interference, but there are commercial purchases. Do you recognize that the Trudeau family, because of its ties to China, the admiration that your brother Justin has for the dictatorship, as he mentioned, and your collaboration with China, would it not be a great target for China because of your brother being a political party leader at the time and who is now a prime minister? Do you believe that the Trudeau family has become a great target? I can't speak for my brother, but for the foundation, and I never thought that there was any interference. But with all the knowledge that you have and everything that you've written, you've never thought that Canada could become a target? Yes, theoretically, but at all the steps of the foundation while I was there, no. And I refused the idea that those people were trying to interfere. Because if so, then why didn't they keep ties with me? So the only donations that you participated in is the donation that comes from China. That's the only contract that you signed. It's a contract with a Chinese company. It was the only signing ceremony that you participated in for a donation. As I stated many times, it's the only donation that had 3 or 4 parties. So if there had been other donations where the Trudeau family needed to sign their name, and so you didn't see there the will of those people to have a Trudeau family representative? No. They were actually quite disinterested with the Trudeau family during the first meeting. He knew Trudeau Sr., but did not want to work with the Trudeau Foundation. But from December 2017, a letter sent to Mr. Rosenberg by Mr. Lefebvre, Alexandre said that Mr. Binzang could help us create an even bigger program to allow universities to receive donations from China in memory of Pierre Trudeau. At that time, I was not hiding that it was important that Canadian universities participate in academic diplomacy. We all want China to move towards a rules-based state like democracy. Inaudible. In your book, you defended the Chinese Communist Party. No. We need to recognize certain accomplishments of that regime, and we need to compare China to China, not China to France or to Canada. China, after Mao, the first years of the revolution were horrible. But with Deng Xiaoping, we saw a time that's over with Xi Jinping. But China now is trying to interfere and to extend its tentacles everywhere. You're a specialist, Mr. Trudeau. Yes, and I would have been the first to see if there had been attempts at interference, and there weren't any. So you think that CSIS is completely wrong? I don't know, but I think that what the Globe and Mail is sharing is wrong. And yet, the same source made it so that the Prime Minister organized a meeting with a Conservative MP to inform him of intimidation tactics by a Chinese diplomat. So it's probably the same source that shared this data with regards to the Trudeau Foundation. We can't pick and choose information. I don't know, Mr. Berthold. Your time is over.
You have the last 5 minutes of this round. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Trudeau, for joining us and adding a lot of clarity to the situation here. As a university educator myself, I understand the value a scholarship can have on a young person, their family. So I wanted to just ask you a little bit about that. What are the short, medium, and long-term impacts of investing in students and their futures through scholarships that you deliver?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bain. That goes to the heart of why the Trudeau Foundation was created. Our country is well served by having as many of our leaders as possible being well educated. It's to make understand the scholarships at the Trudeau Foundation, especially the way they're joined with the mentorships and the fellowships, are really aimed at having brilliant. They're already, when we choose them, are already brilliant university students, but giving them an exposure to how ideas can percolate and move outside of the university world is core to the experience of the Trudeau Foundation. It's why, as I was explaining, that they were regularly exposed to roundtables with senior civil servants to understand here's how civil servants take problems and try to digest them and then turn them into policy. This kind of business leaders, activists, the courts. In many ways, the foundation was trying to amplify and extend the university experience into other realms so that these scholars were empowered, even if only as universities, to be much, much more well-versed in communicating outside of their departments in but also engaging the world outside of us. And we've had, we're now seeing that the first rounds of scholars are prominent Canadians in universities, some outside. Some have become mayors of towns in Canada. So the experience is one of creating leaders, creating people who serve the country through and because of reason.
Future leaders of the country, sure. And how much is the average scholarship?
The numbers. I think the scholarship is it's a $40,000. No, it's a $60,000 scholarship with a $20,000 travel allowance. The goal of the creation of the foundation was to allow university students, who our ex-president even said are trained to be ultra specific, to range outside of their departments, participate in academic events that they wouldn't otherwise be able to reach, and that's part of the travel allowance.
So you've mentioned the areas of research. At the end of the day, it's important that this work continues and the charity is able to continue to support the young people. So what do you see as a path forward here? Well,
I would take this opportunity to put a message to them that this has nothing to do with them, that this is a political crisis and a management crisis. The management crisis, the good news is it's over. The foundation is already, building up again and about to announce a next cohort of scholars. And these people have to continue their amazing work, why they were chosen to do this work, which has nothing to do with what we're discussing today. And it has been a painful distraction to them, and that's probably the main reason why I've come here. It's just doesn't, it's not about what the foundation does. The foundation is about supporting leaders in academic research.
Yeah, and to your point there, we've heard from experts, Artur Volchinsky and Michael Junot-Katsuya, who've sort of echoed those statements, saying that if we're studying foreign interference, we need to do it in a non-partisan way. So would you agree that it's important to investigate foreign interference in a sober and non-partisan way?
More than ever. the impact of foreign interference on our country has already been significant. I do think China's sort of got a lot of catching up to do. It's a very internally driven country. It doesn't really understand democracies and all the rest, but the danger is certainly there. But we look at, I mean, I've been hearing reports of Russian use of social media to create doubts around vaccine use long before the pandemic. You know, and we've seen what health misinformation can do to democracies. And so, I mean, this committee should probably meet every day, every week, every year, because the amount of things, I'm afraid to say that, frankly, this is a waste of time because there is not a foreign interference issue here at the Foundation. And I know the documentary record will make that clear as it's disseminated.
I think that's your time, Mr. Baines. So that concludes our first round. And for the record, I'm prepared to meet every day if we have to get to the bottom of this. So like we've done with other witnesses where we've had them for 2 hours, we're going to reset the clock. We're going to start on our 6-minute rounds to be fair to every party at this committee. And our first 6-minute intervention is for Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, sir. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Let me say at the outset that your assertion that Beijing diplomats were present at meetings with the Foundation in the negotiation of the donation to provide translation services to the donors to be completely unbelievable. It simply is absurd. But you further stated that Millennium Golden Eagle Inc. Canada, the source of the donation, is a Canadian company in good standing. This is a shell company based out of a house in Dorval that is controlled by the China Cultural Industry Association, which is part of the United Front Work Department. Receipts were sent to Hong Kong and then Beijing to the very same address of this United Front Work Department controlled company. So do you consider this company to be one of good standing, really?
Montreal's belief in the matter quite seriously.
Yeah, well, I don't think any Canadian who's serious about Beijing interference would view such a company to be a company in good standing, and they certainly wouldn't consider it to be a true Canadian company.
If they had wanted to interfere, I would have seen traces of that.
Mr. Trudeau, I controlled the time. I asked the questions, you answered them. Now, Mr. Chair, changing gears, on September 10th, 2015, Elise Comtois, the executive director of the Trudeau Foundation, sent an email to the executive committee hoping to quickly organize a signing ceremony on Monday, September 14th, 2015. In that email, you were specifically mentioned to represent the Foundation's board and the family. This rushed meeting of a signing ceremony with the donors just happened to coincide with a time when your brother and the Liberal Party were surging in the polls, when your brother was on track to realistically become the Prime Minister of Canada, which he did a month later. That signing ceremony did not take place, and on Friday, September 11th, 2015, Natalka Harris of the Trudeau Foundation emailed you to explain that there were still outstanding issues, not between the Trudeau Foundation and the donors, but with the University of Montreal. Nonetheless, she had asked that you fly from Vancouver over the weekend to meet with the donors anyway to express appreciation for the forthcoming gift. So did you have that meeting? Did you fly to Montreal?
I live in Montreal, so there's an
You were
inaccuracy.
in Vancouver at this time.
No, I don't remember that meeting. Yes, that's right. I remember watching that debate in September where I suddenly realized, oh my God, my brother's going to become Prime Minister. It was a moment I will never forget. But No, I don't remember that meeting. I must say that I can even share the
So
emails.
you-
when
so you
when the
don't
first
remember
time that Université de Montréal contacted me, there was an urgency. They wanted immediately to meet with these donors because they wanted immediately to get the money to launch $1 million scholarship at Université de Montréal.
Well, you said that you met with Zhang in June of 2014.
Correct.
How many times did you meet with Zhang after?
I met him at the signing ceremony the second time.
Okay, so you did not meet with him in 2015.
In 2015, it didn't work out. And as I say, there was great urgency in 2013 when the first email I got was that there's a great opportunity with serious Chinese, people that want to donate to the university.
Okay.
Please meet
Thank
us
you
at your
for
earliest
that.
convenience.
On May 19th, 2016, Justin Trudeau held a cash for access dinner in Toronto attended by Zhang Bin. Were you in attendance?
No, I was not. I heard about it like many of you in the newspapers, and it was a moment of realizing, you know what, no more academic diplomacy at the Trudeau Foundation.
Why would Zhang Bin be at a fundraiser for Justin Trudeau, a cash for access event, even though he is not a citizen of Canada? He's a Chinese national who was unable to donate. Why would he be there?
I bet you he wanted a photo with the Prime Minister to show to his friends.
A photo of the
But you'd have to ask him.
And-
You know
and
what?
then-
And I have no
then-
reason to doubt that this man never tried anything that would look like interference. So as far as I'm concerned, he's an honorable man.
Nothing that would look like foreign interference, and then 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later, suddenly a $70,000 check to the Trudeau Foundation.
That had started in, the process of that had started in 2014. And they had wanted to get everything done very quickly at the beginning, as I was saying. They had wanted to do it at l'Université de Montréal. The Trudeau Foundation, from his point of view, was an unfortunate add-in. Here's a new prime minister. He's a rich guy. He likes being in fancy occasions. I think he wanted his photo with him.
Suddenly is there at a cash for access.
Do you think he
event.
discussed policy?
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
Got 5 seconds, Mr.
Okay,
Cooper.
well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to go, Mr. Fergus, I believe you're up next for 6 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, puis merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Trudeau, for being with us today. I was very interested in your opening remarks and the 8 questions that you raised. I would like to deepen my knowledge of some of those questions, because the goal of this committee is to determine, firstly, was there a link between the Trudeau Foundation and Justin Trudeau or the Trudeau government? You started to answer that question. And second thing, about whether or not there was attempts at interference, because we heard such things from other witnesses. And with regards to that first question, I'll ask you questions that I asked to Mr. Rosenberg and Ms. Fournier. Were there meetings between the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation and the Prime Minister's office? No. With the Prime Minister? No. With his staff? No. Anyone with any direct or indirect ties? No. So there was no link. No. As I explained to Mr. Green, especially in the beginning, we needed to be very solid that there was going to be no contact. Even in the Harper, even during the Harper government, we knew that there were people who wanted to politicize the Trudeau Foundation. As I explained, the Trudeau Foundation is an academic foundation and wanted to recognize intellectual work. And it's the greatest service, one of the greatest services that we can offer to our country. And Pierre Elliott Trudeau was an intellectual before and after being Prime Minister. Canada is a country of ideas that is constantly changing. And supporting academic work is a good thing for the country. Thank you. With regards to interference now, with the donors to the foundation, what were the conditions of that donation? There were no conditions. They agreed. Well, it's Morris that suggested it. It was not their idea to make a donation to the Trudeau Foundation. Can you explain that? You said that when you received that emergency email to go to the Université de Montréal. Well, the Université de Montréal in 2013, I sent you an article from U of T that explained how proud they were to receive donations from that same donor to commemorate Mr. Beckham. Shortly after that, and I think he had explained it even when I met him in June, he was so excited by that he wanted to do the same thing in French at the Université de Montréal and commemorate another great Canadian, according to the Chinese, Pierre Trudeau. And they wanted to do that in the fall of 2013. I imagine that there were agreements with Mr. Lefebvre, and they said that for Pierre Trudeau, his family's here, the foundation's here, we should consult them first. And you were invited to participate because you were part of the branding of Pierre Trudeau. My brother wasn't doing it anymore because he had other things to do, and so by default I was responsible for the private family matters, and I still am. So the donor and the Université de Montréal would have liked for things to move very quickly, for me to say, yes, go ahead. But even at that time, I was writing a book on China. I thought it was essential that Canada participate in China's education, if I can say it that way, to show Chinese researchers and to show the Chinese people how things are done in Canada and how I believe that our model is the best in the world, and I wanted to show that to them. They trust us because of Bichuan, Bitun, and Trudeau. They once said that Canadians are Westerners that they can trust. I don't know if they say that anymore. I have very little time left. Who had suggested first using the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation for that donation to the Université de Montréal? Who had suggested it? I had said to the Université de Montréal that usually academic donations needed to go through the Trudeau Foundation. That's not what they wanted to hear, but I said to them, just wait for our president to arrive. I didn't do any negotiation. I didn't want to. I was a volunteer. I am a volunteer. That wasn't my role. So I asked them to wait for the new president, who was a senior official. And it was Mr. Rosenberg who understood how things worked, and he said, well, there would be a donation program with the Université de Montréal and the foundation, which is what I had said to the donors and the Université de Montréal. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Fergus. Mr. Villemur, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Trudeau, if Pascal Fournier was the problem in the foundation, why do you believe that that 8 other administrators stepped down with her? I would say that there were people who believed what she was saying. So they were probably afraid and were acting in good faith. And so when the president herself shares her legal opinion, and I would have told them to wait for the investigation to be concluded. The last email before her stepping down was that the investigation was going to happen. So I imagine that the former president was frustrated that the investigation was happening independently from the administration. But a lot of people stepped down at the same time. Well, yes, and you'll see it in the summary that I'll share with you, that some wrote that they are volunteers. Who wants to volunteer in an ambiance of tension? And it's for a reason as simple as that they left. There are so many things that are different between the two versions of facts. Why would we believe you instead of believing Ms. Fournier? Will you see it? You'll hear from the president of the board to say that, and you can ask him, share the legal opinions that were of lawyers that were saying that there were conflicts of interest. She wouldn't be able to show that. The proof will be sent to you. The documents will be sent to you. I was not an administrator, but the administrators will be able to share that with you. So we won't find proof of conflict of interest. No. You won't find any proof that lawyers stated that. But what were the law firms? Miller Thompson and one other. I know that you are interested in China. Where did that interest come from? 2005, Jacques Hébert, who had written Deux Innocents in Rouge, it essentially stated that China was poor, problematic, but wait, China will become something significant. 2005, Shanghai, they wanted to publish this, and they wanted to read about what foreigners had written on them. And so they had it translated. They invited Jacques, and they asked me, son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, to write the preface. Did you go many times? I went once or twice a year for about 10 years after 2005. Did you ever go with Monsieur Chrétien? No. I know that he liked China. Well, my type of trip was not the same kind of trip that leaders do. I like to travel China and observe things that are not easily seen during a high-level trip. Did you meet with the Chinese consulate in Toronto or in Montreal or elsewhere in Canada? I went to an event with a lot of politicians at the National Arts Centre to commemorate the anniversary of ties between Canada and China, I believe. So there were diplomats present. Did you participate at any meetings like that in China? I have many friends that are Canadian diplomats in China. But Chinese officials, I have met some in China. So Saint-Jacques, you know that person? Yes. He was saying this morning that you were a useful idiot. I was shocked by him saying that. Clearly he didn't read my book, or he would have seen that I had a very nuanced approach. It is the Journal de Montréal, after all. It's not the best source for serious information. I'm not sure that Guy Saint-Jacques said that. If so, then he should talk to me. Because it's unfair. I wrote a very serious book on the Chinese people. I'm not an apologist for the Chinese government. I understand that the government is an imperial government. So you know Mr. Saint-Jacques. I know him. I know his reputation. Have you met him? Probably. But he has an opinion of you anyway. What are your political positions regarding China now? I think that Xi's government is a problem for their country and for the world. They're at a transition from Xiaoping's period that was open, They were diplomatically modest during a very imperial and difficult period, and it was responding to a world becoming more difficult. China, unfortunately, at its freest, and we want freedom for the Chinese people. They might not have the same freedom that we have, but the peak of their freedom would have been in 2010. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau.
You have 6 minutes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to the issue of governance. Certainly, the questions that you've heard today, the allegations that have been made at committee, the confusion around what's been written policy. The former president, Pascal Fournier, stated that when she came on, she had to institute a bunch of written policies. Is that true?
Yes.
And prior to that, there wasn't any?
There was some, but we needed more policies. That's for sure.
Would you agree that that's a bit strange, given the types of people, the caliber of people that were on the board, that they didn't have like basic written policies on some of this stuff?
No, part of these policies were about a natural evolution of when the board started. Would we have had a policy and when you're building on sexual harassment or these kind of things that are germane to academia, but
specifically to get into specificity around the political risk that the board was carrying with a former prime minister and his son, who is a current politician, became leader, became prime minister, and a brother. That there was no policy around that strikes me as unusual.
All my colleagues know the type of relationship I have with my brother, which is a fraternal one.
Sure.
But
the public doesn't.
The public doesn't, which is another reason why I'm happy to be here.
And
they probably would never believe me that my brother and I'm one of the few adult people in this country who can offer him a world outside of politics.
Fair enough, but you'd mentioned something. It was the questioning from the Conservative member that talked about the cash for access. And you said there was a moment of realizing that there should be no more
academic diplomacy.
Academic diplomacy.
At least not with China or...
So when that happened, did you text your brother, reach out and say, we may have crossed the line here?
No, I never have... there is one exception, but I do not discuss public affairs with my brother. I never do. I don't by text, not when I meet him.
On the run-up to this, you never...
On the run-up to this, we do not discuss...
Any of his advisors from the PMO? Did anybody advise you in preparing for this?
I have no contact with the PMO. I haven't for the duration of his government.
Okay.
Except lawyers from the PMO once asked me about joint property, but this is a private matter.
And I want to give you the opportunity as it relates to CSIS. Yep. I'm assuming if you're under investigation, what have you, like at any point in time, did anybody outside of the foundation flag for you that the foundation might be a target of foreign interference?
No, and if again, as Mr. Rosenberg said yesterday, if there was someone who could be briefed on that at the time, it would be him. It's again why I doubt the veracity of that report.
Now you've talked about your nuanced book, your appreciation, your understanding on China. We've spoken about the China Cultural Industry Association, which, when you go to their website and you look, like it has the founder of Alibaba, one of the richest people in the world on
Evergrande, yeah.
Right? Evergrande's probably another conversation for another time, but did you do due diligence? Did you know with whom you were dealing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there reports to the board?
And let me go back to academic diplomacy.
Just wait. No, sir, I got 3 minutes. I'm going to ask you, were there reports to the board on the due diligence that was taken on this particular donation?
No, to Morris is what I discussed. I said, look, this is...
Would Morris have provided in writing any documents that would have provided an analysis of due diligence on one of the most significant gifts?
No, it wasn't a significant gift. There were more significant gifts.
Sure, but it's still significant. $200,000 is significant.
And at the earliest onset of the gift, this was about opening up academic diplomacy in the view.
In your time and your background work on your book, you would have been aware of the Confucius Institute, would you not?
I have.
And you're aware of the allegations, or at least some of their public statements, that they were actually a propaganda arm of the Chinese government?
Especially more recently, absolutely.
But at the time, even, they were pretty controversial.
Well, again, they're similar to... China has a long way to go on civil society organizations. That's
where I'm getting to, sir, is that I don't believe you to be a useful idiot. I think that if you're somebody who's taken the time and understanding to know the culture with whom you're dealing, I do think, I'll still state, and I stated this to Mr. Morris Rosenberg, it is the West's naivety that they will engage in China and somehow change China and not the other way around that I think has gotten us to this place. But again, that's a political statement, not one that's germane to interference. If you knew that the Confucius Institute had these criticisms, you knew that the Chinese government has an active way of using this type of cultural influence, academic influence, why were you not better prepared at the board level, given the nature of the foundation, given the fact your brother, is a prime minister? Why was there not more duty of care at the board level to safeguard yourself against this?
As I say, I was more involved earlier, and then I barely heard about the Chinese donation until it was time to sign it at whatever that date was, and it happened in 2016. Morris had and still has my complete trust as someone, a high-level civil servant who knows how to manage these things. So I felt that we were in good hands.
In my closing, I'll say this, sir, that there's probably going to be additional testimony. Some of it will likely conflict with yours. I want to give you the opportunity to invite you to provide back to this committee in writing any rebuttals you might have on that, as well as an expansion on any of those 8 points that you feel might provide more clarity around the issues that have been presented here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our first round of questioning. We are now into the second round, which we're going to start for 5 minutes. And Mr. Genuis, you're first for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. I know there's sort of a conflict of facts that's become evident through your testimony. You've said that Ms. Fournier is wrong, the Globe and Mail is wrong. You've implied disagreements with CSIS as well. So the committee and the public is going to have to decide what they believe in terms of the facts. I've read your book on China, and I know you've done a lot of thinking about China. And what I find particularly unbelievable in your testimony are two things. The first is that foreign donations skyrocketed to the Trudeau Foundation as soon as your brother became prime minister. The allegation isn't that the foundation was taking policy positions, but that people were donating to the foundation with the intention of currying favor with the prime minister as a result. Even without all the other facts, it seems on face of it suspicious that there was a spike in foreign donations, a massive spike, as soon as the prime minister took office. And yet it seems like you're contending that that was coincidence. But the second thing from what you're saying, we're talking about different meetings. People are coming to those meetings who are from the consulate, who are affiliated with United Front-backed organizations. And you're saying in every case they're probably just there for translation. The implication of your comment, sir, is that there aren't qualified translators available in this country who aren't affiliated with the Chinese government, or that it's somehow normal for apolitical Chinese people in Canada to go to the Chinese government for assistance with translation services. Isn't that unbelievable?
Two questions there I saw. One, for the spike in foreign donations, there was no spike in foreign donations. We had a new chair come in at that time, coincidentally, John McCall McBain, a very wealthy, philanthropically inclined gentleman who happens to live in Switzerland and made a sizable donation. That was the extent of the spike of our board chair, of prominent and highly respected Canadian who
I think the numbers will show something different.
The generous donation, that's the spike, and it has nothing to do with politics. Your second question, I believe, was
your contention about
China
translation
works that way. That the notion of
we're not talking about China, we're talking about Canada. We're talking about the idea that if you need a qualified translator between English or French and a Chinese language, that it would be normal for people to go to the consulate or clearly United Front affiliated organizations and ask for help with translation. Isn't that absurd?
I don't even know whether these were translators, but I'm saying you have to take that in account into your understanding of how Mr. Zhang Bin operated as a non-English speaker, French speaker.
The issue is you had people from the consulate who were there. You had people from these Chinese government affiliated organizations
from other countries at our at moments. It's a good thing to do academic diplomacy.
This isn't just any other country, sir, and this didn't
at this
trigger.
Time in 2015-16, China was not the hard place it has now become. and we were not on our guard in the same way. No one was. Even our CSIS agents will report that.
Yeah.
Things have changed
Sir,
a great deal.
I think it's fair to say that there has been a shift, but I think there were many people that were aware and had concerns. You've also taken a lot of speaking engagements personally with Confucius Institutes in Canada. I wanted to ask, have you been compensated for any of the work you've done with Confucius Institutes?
I think I spoke once at the Confucian Institute as a sidebar event because I was in. First of all, I'm a reader of Confucius, so the Confucius.
As am I, and the Confucius Institutes have nothing to do with the work or
Chinese
legacy of
culture
Confucius.
is.
But can you answer the question though? Were you compensated for any of that work you did?
I don't
for the
believe I
Confucius
was.
Institutes?
No.
Okay. Have your film production companies ever received funding from individuals or institutions in China that are China based?
I think I received in terms of my book was translated into Chinese and I received a payment from a Chinese publisher, quite modest, frankly. But so I have sold things into China, namely my book. My films, I never made a film that was sold.
Have you had Chinese government affiliated institutions based in China fund your work at any point?
No.
Okay. You said in your book, yes, I still occasionally defend the CCP. For one thing, China. I don't think China could have come so far so quickly without the unity and organizational power that it provided. Do you still believe that?
That's the key point to understanding recent Chinese history, that the Chinese was China, and you need to compare China to China, really, to do proper analysis of China. And the unifying principles, especially after, as I say, the Deng Xiaoping period, caused by...
Do you still believe that contention, though? Does that still reflect your
Do I believe
worldview?
that the Chinese government made considerable economic achievements? I do, yes. In a certain period.
Do you think that the CCP, that China could not have progressed in this way without the unity and organizational power provided by the CCP? That's your argument in the book. Do you still believe that?
Please.
That's sort of there's a hypothesis. It's hard to know, but I think one have to state in a positive sense that the organizing principles of the Chinese Communist Party had made a significant economic impact on the country. Correct, yes.
That's it, Mr. Genuis. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Housefather, welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Mr. Trudeau, for being here today. I just want to tie up some loose ends because we're getting later on in your testimony. I'm on Corporations Canada's website. And Millennium Golden Eagle International Canada Inc. is a company in good standing according to Corporations Canada website and has been since 20 April 2012. Do you feel that you should be able to rely on Corporations Canada's website to determine whether a company is in good standing or not?
I would say so, yeah. I'm not an accountant or a financial expert, but that's a good start.
And as you mentioned, the Bank of Montreal held their bank accounts. There's obligations of the bank in terms of diligence on companies before they would open such an account. So as well, you would be able to rely on something like that.
It's also a very good sign.
Excellent. So then we're getting to the question of the donation. People have been throwing around different figures. I heard 200,000 many times. It was 140,000, correct?
The contract was for 200,000 to do conferences, but the payouts were in two portions, and it made to 140. And the last portion was decided for political reasons that we weren't going to take it because we weren't going to do the program anyhow.
Exactly. So when I get to that question of 140,000 and how material was that, how much money was in the bank account of the Trudeau Foundation at the time? How much money was there?
Well, somewhere around 145 million, perhaps.
145 million. So this 140,000 was something that clearly was a pretty small amount in the overall context of everything.
Yes, as I've wanted to expand on the need for academic diplomacy, it was never about the money. It was trying to get brilliant Chinese students exposed to Canadian ways.
Perfect. And when we talk about the donation, the tax receipt was made to the company that made the donation.
Correct.
And there's been a lot of concern that it was mailed somewhere in China to somebody's home. So if I'm a Canadian living abroad and I get my tax documents at the home abroad, I still have to file my Canadian taxes with my Canadian, with the proof of donations. Do you know of any reason anybody could use a Canadian tax donation if they don't have to pay taxes in Canada?
Again, I'm not as Mr. Rosenberg said yesterday, it's quite clearly of only use for a Canadian company for their Canadian tax declaration. That seems pretty clear to me.
And in order to pay taxes in Canada, you must have other activities in Canada, or otherwise you wouldn't be liable for taxation in Canada.
Correct. You must have income in Canada, yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't a company that was a shell company doing nothing. They clearly had some income of some type. Let me ask you the question also, because it's easy to throw around chronologies and to say, well, the Liberals were surging in the polls in September 2015. So was Hillary Clinton at that time in the Democratic primaries in the United States against Bernie Sanders. So was Brexit. So it's, you know, I can throw in a lot of different things that were happening about that time when you have a chronology of things that were happening. When it comes to, because you mentioned the ceremony and the four parts of the agreement, was the Trudeau family one of, you mentioned signatory, were there four lines where you also signed on behalf of the Trudeau family?
No, it was a three-part signature. I was signing on behalf of the foundation and of the family.
But of the family, because you were giving the Université de Montréal rights related to the use of the name of your dad, that was, and you as an executor of the will needed to do that.
Correct, yeah.
You couldn't do that. The foundation couldn't do that. Mr. Rosenberg couldn't do that by himself.
I guess I would have probably had to sign a procuration. Maybe I would have if I wasn't there. But there was a ceremonial, as Mr. Rosenberg mentioned, a ceremonial element there that we all felt was very appropriate and not untoward.
Perfect. And just une dernière question, peut-être, je ne suis pas certain combien de temps j'en ai.
A last question, perhaps, at the time that I have left. Who was responsible for the minutes, the three remaining members? And when you talked today about your beliefs with regards to what happened, you're basing yourself on the administrators that were there for those meetings. Yes, and the lawyers who were there who stated that they never stated that there was a conflict of interest that would lead to a change in the governance structure.
30 seconds.
Can I just ask in my last question, Mr. Trudeau, is there any one of those 8 questions that you feel has not been cleared up enough and that you want to elaborate on? Briefly?
I must admit, we've covered lots of different things. As I say, I will take up Mr. Green's offer to say if, you know, the work continues and if there's further submissions that I have to make, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. Mr. Trudeau, Monsieur Villemure, vous avez 2 minutes.
Monsieur Villemure, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, 2.5 minutes. Mr. Trudeau, you have made representations on behalf of the foundation. Public, you mean? You've represented the foundation during meetings? Not often, but it has happened. Have you met Lagacan in Paris? No. Lagacan? Yes, in Ottawa, maybe 10 years ago, when he created his center. So no, he has no ties with the foundation. No. You know David Johnson? Yes. Since I was a child. He's a very knowledgeable man who is interested in a great many things, including China. What is your relationship with him? I met him when I was young. He was a friend of my father. We used to ski together, but he's a great Canadian. I know his daughters. He's a friend of the family. So you have a bit of a proximity with Mr. Johnson. Not recently, but in the past when I was younger, yes. We went skiing together. Earlier, you talked about an independent committee in order to shed a light on the situation, the governance structure, and the management crisis. Mr. Johnson often says that he is independent, but is it the same kind of independence or the same type of proximity? Apologies. You want me to comment on Mr. Johnson? You talked about an independent committee for verifying the diligence, but the criteria, the committee wanted to create the mandate for the investigators legally and to be independent. They can't be linked to that. Yes, and you'll see that in the brief from the meeting. Is Mr. Johnson independent as a rapporteur? You're asking me to give my opinion on government decisions, which I haven't followed. David Johnson, to me, is a Canadian who is beyond all doubt. He's very honorable, not only in title. I think that this country can trust him at all levels for any task. Thank you, Monsieur Villemur.
Monsieur Trudeau. Mr. Green, you have 2.5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to follow along that line of questioning, and I put this to Mr. Rosenberg. You may have watched it. You had spoken about some of the tensions at the board about an independent audit. We're now in a time where there's allegations that the Chinese government has directly intimidated and threatened an MP. We're at a time when there's allegations in the 2019 and 2021 elections of there being interference. We are now at a time when these allegations, leaks, unverified, anonymous leaks from supposedly from CSIS, who knows where, are out against the foundation. And Mr. Johnson has been appointed to be a special rapporteur. It is our position, is my position as New Democrats, that there be an independent public inquiry into foreign interference. I'm to take it, sir, that you're here today in some regard to protect the family's legacy and the foundation. And I'm wondering if you would be open to, should there be a public inquiry, that the things that have transpired here be handed over to a public inquiry, much like the Rouleau Commission, which I think provided a really good framework, to perhaps take that forensic audit into the foundation to assure the public that at no time was the foundation used as a vehicle to influence the Prime Minister. Would you be open to that?
Look, I'm not a decider at the foundation currently. I'm not on the board. So
I'm asking you as somebody who's there as a member
as I've said all
of
along,
of the
I
family.
think any efforts to at some point I am here today to say we're wasting our time on the notion of interference. I have seen no trace of it.
But
I don't think there was
unfortunately,
a
that's not up for you to decide,
Correct,
sir.
correct.
And
But-
unfortunately, when it comes to things like interest and conflict of interest, pecuniary interest, you know, it's as much as the perception as it is the reality. And I'm going to take you at your word. I'm going to take you, you know, at your testimony here today that you have an interest in clearing the air about this. So
I
I'll
want
put
to
it to
defend
you,
the foundation, for sure.
and you know, in fairness to your family, I would imagine you would want to defend the legacy of your father, who's now been brought in to this really murky world.
My father, I think his legacy is elsewhere than all of this, you know, in many ways. So I'm here because as I said, I think this is a great distraction for the important mission of the foundation.
Okay.
And
So
any
would you be
efforts
open
to
an
bring clarity
independent-
to it, I can only welcome, frankly, of all forms. I think, but I'm not a decider of these things.
Sure.
I know the board is launching an independent inquiry, as was the goal for these last weeks, which brought the squabble about that we're talking with. And I know the chair of the board asked the Auditor General to look at our affairs. So the opportunity, I frankly almost, I mean, I'm not a lawyer either, but the courts may be a place to deal with this as well. The courts are truly impartial. This is a political forum, we'll have to understand. Everyone here has an agenda. So it's not necessarily the best place to get at the truth, but
Thank
I
you,
want the truth to come out, for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Trudeau, we're still on the 5-minute round now. Back to it. Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Trudeau, your claim that you have a fraternal relationship with your brother is not entirely accurate. You helped in your brother's nomination race in 2008, his leadership campaign in 2013. You were extremely important in that campaign. And before your brother left for China in 2016, he read your book. And 5 days after he returned from that trip, he showed up at a promotional event with you for your book. In those circumstances, would you agree with me that the two wealthy billionaire Chinese nationals with direct links to the communist regime influencing you was directly influencing the Prime Minister?
No, I disagree with those qualifications entirely. I didn't play an important role in 2013. I wasn't involved in 2013. I helped my brother at the very beginning of 2012 when he had an embryonic team, and I helped in a very fraternal way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you. Just want to confirm a number of points. I'm doing some cleanup here. You only signed one donation in the foundation's history, the now infamous $200,000 from the Beijing regime, correct?
I think we've gone over this time and time again. I've
So
even told the
answer
committee
is
why
yes?
we signed.
That answer is
why I
yes.
signed.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. You didn't question the tax receipts being sent to ultimately China, did you?
I explained that tax receipts being sent to China because the donor was a Chinese citizen raises no confusion or red flags at any level.
In fact, you said that, and I quote your words here, that the Millennium Golden Eagle International was a legitimate business operating in Canada. But if you exercise your due diligence, which you claim that you did, and the board did, and your organization did, you would have realized that the corporate address for this multinational corporation was in the Montreal suburb of Dorval, probably a 4,000 to 5,000 square foot mansion, very large home with a pool and a basketball court. Were you aware of that?
I would challenge your understanding of
Were
the
you aware
corporate
of that?
world
Yes
of
or no,
Canada.
sir?
There's nothing. The corporate address of my film company is an Art
Sir,
Deco
were
home
you
on
aware
Pine
of
Avenue.
were you aware of the
I was
facts
made
that I
aware
just
of that,
presented?
and there's
Thank
nothing
you.
there.
Were you further aware that the address that this company listed in Hong Kong, where the original receipt went to, actually doesn't exist? That a reporter from the Globe who actually attended Hong Kong went to the address trying to make some inquiries about the operators of this company. The person who answered the door had no idea. Were you aware of that, sir?
No, I wasn't aware, but I know corporate addresses are fairly irrelevant, frankly, for the nature of ownership, for the nature
Thank
of
you.
taxes.
Thank you. Everything is irrelevant. I get it. You didn't question the urgency of providing the donation around major political events for your brother, the Prime Minister, did you?
Sorry, repeat the question?
You did not question the urgency of providing the donation around major political events for your brother.
No, because there was an urgency long before my brother was in politics.
You never questioned the intention of the wealthy billionaires linked directly to the communist regime who were highly interested in the scholarship of the Trudeau Foundation. You did not question that.
They were not interested in the scholarship of the Trudeau Foundation. It became a condition for them to do their work at the Université de Montréal.
You said you expressed some concerns about the Globe story. You talked about it being simply intelligence. My former background as a Crown attorney, I rely upon evidence when I present a case. And the evidence we have here from an unnamed source from Canada's spy agency is there is actually a taped conversation between Mr. Zhang, the philanthropist that you claim is simply a legitimate businessman, and an unnamed commercial attaché at one of China's consulates in Canada discussing the possibility of your brother defeating Stephen Harper's Conservatives, forming the government, and furthermore, and more damaging, is instructions that Beijing would reimburse him for the entire amount of the donation to the Trudeau Foundation. You dismiss that simply what? As hearsay?
Well, the facts are wrong. There was never any question of $1 million donation to the Trudeau Foundation.
No, $200,000. Let's be more
but
specific.
But the report in the Globe and Mail says $1 million. So when the facts are wrong, and you haven't seen the evidence, and I won't, so I will reserve judgment.
The consulate who interfered with the family of a sitting Conservative member in this Parliament and threatened that member, do you think that consulate should be expelled immediately?
Very quick
I'm
answer,
not aware
please.
of the facts of all that, so I'm not going to pronounce myself on it.
You don't read the papers?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brock. Thank you. Ms. Sachs, you're up next for 5 minutes. Just to advise the committee, if I work the time back, we should have about 6 minutes left after Ms. Sachs's intervention. We're going to go for a final 3 minutes to the Conservatives, a final 3 minutes to the Liberals at the end. Ms. Sachs, you have 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll thank Mr. Trudeau for joining us here today. I want to lean into context, because I think context is really important. It's something that you mentioned in your deep understanding of China yourself, of there's China then and China now. And I'd like to go back to China at 2013, where were you aware if Mr. Zhang did other very largesse donations to other university institutions in Canada at that time?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it was from the very start, this was a repeat performance that he wanted to do Université de Montréal. Of the Bethune donation to the U of T for their med school.
Right. Okay. So $1 million donation to
$800,000 to the med school. Well, I provided you that as a single piece of evidence.
Yes.
So that's very clear. That was clear from me to the start. This was a legitimate donation by a legitimate philanthropist.
Correct. And there were no questions at the time with the University of Toronto with Mr. Zhang's, the philanthropy or the source of it.
No.
And my understanding, if we can just elaborate on that, because context is important, Mr. Zhang's intention was to donate to Université de Montréal, and Trudeau Foundation and its excellent work and scholarship, and that program became part of, but there was a negotiation process that had to happen. It wasn't simply that Mr. Zhang woke up and decided, I want to donate to the Trudeau Foundation in the same way that I've donated to the medical school at U of T.
No, he was not. He didn't have an interest in donating to the Trudeau Foundation.
So there was a lot of negotiating a priori.
It was saying, there was going to be a partnership. It had to be presented, and as the president of the Université de Montréal stated, there was some reluctance on his part to complicate what he wanted was a simple deal like he did at U of T.
I understand. Okay, so let's further the context of that time frame. So it's 2013, 2014. The Harper Conservatives are in power, and Stephen Harper aggressively had pursued a secret 31-year trade deal with China at that time with Xi Jinping. And so that was going on. And at that time, did the Harper government or officials brief you or the Trudeau Foundation? Did CSIS come to the Trudeau Foundation at that time and say, we're a little bit concerned here about potential foreign influence with Mr. Zhang's contributions, whether it's to the Trudeau Foundation, Université de Montréal, University of Toronto? Were any conversations like that had?
There were not any conversations.
So there were no warnings by the Harper government while they were in power, making secret trade deals with the Chinese government and Xi Jinping to say to the Trudeau Foundation, which was really an entity of the civil service in part in terms of setting it up and its bylaws during the Conservative government's time. No one thought to brief you or to say, hey.
Exactly. If there had been damning evidence, I would have thought they would have brought it to the attention of someone.
So that was China then.
China
right?
then.
And, my colleagues here are trying to connect the dots to China now and the concerns that they have about allegations for a member from the Conservative Party on a vote that actually, I was on Foreign Affairs Committee at that time, and I was also a member that was banned by China for the Uyghur study. So do you think this is a little bit of crystal ball pontification in terms of how the Trudeau Foundation could possibly be connected to this kind of
What would I think is a crystal ball pontification?
That they're alleging that what is happening now in terms of China today. So let's talk context. So China 2023. So a decade has passed.
Yeah.
That there is some kind of direct line of connection.
The world has moved, but this is a state of politics, not looking for back a lot and seeing the world changes. Our diplomatic goals, objectives, the nature of the very diplomacy changed. Stephen Harper was eager to trade with China. We're still trading for China. Look around. The room is filled with Chinese-made objects. We're in a deep relationship with China that continues. Diplomacy is very difficult for many reasons right now, and it's changing all the time. And it has changed significantly since when this donation started. And the very goals of academic, which I still believe in, by the way. I just don't think the Trudeau Foundation can do it so long as there's a Trudeau government.
So in the China then, the Harper government didn't see any need to raise a red flag to you, the Trudeau Foundation, or any of these contributions?
That's correct.
Okay. How much time do I have, Chair? 12 seconds. So I will cede my time, and Mr. Turnbull will take those 3 minutes. When they come up.
When they come back.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. 6 minutes left, 3 and 3. Mr. Barrett, go ahead for 3.
There's been some, I would say unfortunate characterizations about media reporting that you've made, whether it's the Journal de Montréal as not being a credible source for news or the Globe and Mail. We know that a member of Parliament, Michael Chong, his family was intimidated, targeted for intimidation at the behest of Beijing. and it's a fact, whether you've had the opportunity to read it or not. Do you think that the consulate officials who orchestrated this campaign of intimidation should be expelled?
Look, I'd have to read the facts more carefully, and frankly, I'm not a public official. And I'm not even editorialized. I will grant you that there are the risks of China doing malign interference in this country grow by the day and should be taken very seriously. And I believe everyone in the committee does take it very seriously. And I trust, frankly, the government, not just the political government, the civil service, to act in accordance with all the rules.
Have you ever organized any political fundraisers for your brother? Since he ran for a nomination, was first elected in a general election.
In the early days, I was doing a lot because he had like a staff of 2. Did I do any fundraising? I hosted one at my house, yes. Maybe when he was deputy, I got some friends together, and yes, I did do some.
You were named an executor for your father's estate, that's correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And do the assets include book rights, royalties through a numbered company, is that correct?
In some manner, there are book rights, yes.
Do you have control over the numbered company?
I do have control, yes. Well, control, I'm the president of it.
Okay. Did you or Justin Trudeau, do you have, you're the president, who has what are the interests there? Like, what's the breakdown between you and your brother?
My father, because he worked at a law firm for the last 20 years of his life, was surrounded by fiscalists, and there were a lot of companies, and over the years we've slowly wound them down. There's one left, which includes some real estate holdings, book rights, and it's barely operational, but it does continue to exist.
Point of order,
yes.
Chair.
This is private, probably, I guess.
Point of order, Ms. Sachs.
I don't see how private company is relevant to this testimony.
We'll stick around and find out, Ms. Sachs, and I'll keep questioning the witness, and you can try and interrupt, I suppose.
So we went through this yesterday. Unless there's something...
Pardon me?
Unless there's something procedurally...
Your interruption is not helpful, Ryan. As are you. What are you doing here?
Can we have some... just hang on, please, both. Okay. So we're almost done here. But as I mentioned yesterday, unless it's something procedurally within the standing orders, members have the right to ask the questions that they want to ask. There's nothing in Ms. Sachs's intervention to me that is against the standing orders, and we're going to continue with Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett, you have 27 seconds left, so go ahead, sir.
Throughout the testimony that we've had today, you're very sure about some things, and then when we talk about things that actually do speak to the foreign interference, whether it's the reporting, CSIS has a wiretap that confirms that this was an influence operation. That's something that you say you don't know anything about. The Hong Kong address of these donors that matches that of the Chinese Cultural Industrial Association, that's something that you don't know anything about. And you say that the redemption for these folks is that they have a bank account. Well, drug dealers have bank accounts, sir, and that doesn't mean that they're running reputable businesses.
Mr. Barrett, your time is done. I'm going to give you a second to address that if you like, Mr. Trudeau.
There's a lot of innuendo and misinterpretation.
Okay,
I don't think I need to address it.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull, final 3 minutes is yours. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Mr. Trudeau, for being here. I've listened intently to your testimony today. I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach because I have a personal connection with the Trudeau Foundation through my very best friend growing up. He was a Métis Cree individual that experienced intergenerational trauma, struggled with addictions, went through a cycle of homelessness, committed petty theft and crimes, eventually went to jail, hit rock bottom, and eventually got into a rehab program and sort of started turning his life around. He went back to school. He earned a BA, master's degree, and now a PhD. And he also became a best-selling author of a book called From the Ashes. He was significantly helped by the Trudeau Foundation. He's a Trudeau scholar. His name's Jesse Thistle, and he said, once I won the Trudeau Scholarship, I went, oh, my life is going to change now. So I want to ask you, I think it's important that the charitable work of this foundation continue because it does deep, meaningful, and impactful work, and always has. So what do you see as the path forward?
The governance crisis, the management crisis is over. Our inquiries launch. There's an inquiry into the staff turnover, which is, we knew there was some, but there was serious management issues under our former president. That needs to be done, and these are all distractions from the work like Jesse Thistle has done, which I know well. These are extraordinary people. Ask anyone who's dealt with them. They're, as I say, they make us proud to be Canadian, and I know they're focused. You don't get a Trudeau Foundation scholarship when you don't have terrific dedication and discipline. But nonetheless, the very notion that the scholarship that they are so proud to receive has been impugned unfairly is why I'm here today. And I encourage them, keep their heads up, do the work. It is the work of reason, and the work of reason is the work of the Just Society. That I think we can all get behind here, regardless of what party we're from or whatever, that intellectual work in this country is the best of our country.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on that, and I think it is a gross injustice that we're dragging the Trudeau Foundation through the mud for partisan gain, and that's a shame. But thank you for being here today, and I hope that the foundation continues its work.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. That concludes today's testimony. Mr. Trudeau, on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Canadians, I want to thank you for coming today. I also want to thank our clerk for putting all of this together, our analysts as well, and our technicians. Members of the committee, have a good weekend coming up. This is the last committee meeting this week. The meeting is now adjourned.